In 1688, a woman named Anne Glover, or Goody Glover as she was known, was hung for witchcraft in Boston. She was the last person to be hung in Boston for witchcraft, but she was in fact just setting the stage, or those events were setting the stage for what was to come a few years later in the Salem witch trials of 1692 and 1693. In today's Monsterology, I wanted to tell you the story about Goody Glover and the supposed spell she threw onto 4 kids and what those kids endured, and then what might be the causes of this supposedly demonic possession and manipulation. So in today's episode of Monsterology, witchcraft from New England, not quite the Salem story you're used to, and also some very interesting sort of psychology and philosophy. All right, welcome. So here are the images that we're doing today. This is a drawing I did on the iPad based on the search for the witch's mark. This is a drawing I did speculating about the contortions that the kids went through when they were under the spell of witchcraft. And here's kind of a miscellaneous satanic-looking goat and disturbing New England child that I did. I'm going to show you the techniques that I used on all of these. I sort of warmed up with some drawings of characters that I thought fit this kind of time frame of 17th century, relative poverty, struggling Puritans, a lot of superstition. And here I'm just developing the first drawing, which is the search for the mark of the witch. I was sort of inspired to do this one based on the idea of Bridget Bishop. Bridget Bishop was the first so-called witch that was hanged during the Salem Panic. She ran 2 taverns with her husband at the time, and she was said to be a colorful character. And she was accused of witchcraft, and then they claimed when they were investigating her that she had a 3rd nipple. On re-examination, they couldn't find it again, so that tells you something right away. But I just thought, God forbid you have moles or skin tags or anything on your body if you're accused, because you're really screwed. This kind of search for markings of witches were common, and it was very likely that you were gonna fail that test. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Goody Glover, who's sort of the main witch, so-called witch in this case. I'm using witch in scare quotes here because, I don't think any of these people were witches. They were just accused. She was a Catholic Irish woman who immigrated to the U.S. She left Ireland when Oliver Cromwell was purging and persecuting Catholics, and she ended up as a washerwoman. She had terrible luck. I think her husband died when she first got here, and then she ended up working for a Boston family named the Goodwins. And the Goodwins accused her of stealing laundry. She argued against them, and shortly after that, the Goodwin children started to act very strange. They were reportedly running wild and complaining, and they said they had intense heat, saying they were in a red-hot oven, and some reports claimed they were intermittently flying about close to the ground. Witchcraft was quickly declared, and suspicion fell immediately on Anne Glover, who was the washerwoman. And it's around this time that the New England theologian and Harvard man, Cotton Mather's, gets involved. And Cotton Mather's is a really important character in understanding the witch panic of this period, because he writes 2 books. One is based on this case we're talking about, which is Anne Glover. He writes that book in 1689 after he's gone and lived with the family for a little while, and the title of that one is Memorable Providences Relating to Witchcrafts and Possessions. And a few years later, he actually writes Wonders of the Invisible World in 1693, and that one's actually about his role and the nature of the Salem witch trials. What I'm doing in this drawing here is trying to convey some of the creepy and disturbing body changes that occurred for these kids, the Goodwins. They would have fits. There were 4 of them. They would have contortions, twisting, writhing, kind of an overactivation of the muscles, and painful abnormal body positions. Mathers said the fits were different and more strange than epilepsy. And so let me just read to you two paragraphs, and this is from Cotton Mather's original text. He says, describing the kids, he says, sometimes they'd be deaf, sometimes dumb, and sometimes blind, and often all this at once. He says their tongues would be drawn down their throats. Sometimes their tongues would be pulled out upon their chins to a prodigious length. They would have their mouths opened unto such a wideness that their jaws went out of joint, and anon they would clap together again with a force like that of a strong spring lock. The same would happen to their shoulder blades and their elbows and hand wrists and several of their joints. They would at times sort of be in a numbed condition and be drawn together as those that are tied neck and heels, and presently be stretched out, yea, drawn backwards to such a degree that it was feared the very skin of their bellies would have cracked. They would have made piteous outcries, and they were as if they were cut by knives and struck with blows that they could not bear. Their necks would be broken so that their neck bones would seem dissolved unto them that felt after, and yet on a sudden it would become again so stiff that there was no stirring of their heads. Yea, their heads would be twisted almost round, and if main force at that time obstructed a dangerous motion, which they seemed to be upon, they would roar exceedingly. Thus they lay some weeks, most pitiful spectacles, and this while all the further demonstration of witchcraft in these horrid effects, when I went to prayer by one of them, that was very desirous to hear what I said, the child utterly lost her hearing till our prayer was over. And then Mather goes on to describe stuff that they started to do later too, which was strange. Like the kids would try to harm their friends, like try to throw them downstairs or strike their friends, but they would always warn them just beforehand, which I find kind of an amusing detail, that the kid would, just before the kid did some harm, the kid would shout out like, "I'm going to hit you," and then you'd be able to, avoid the drama. And what's interesting now is that Mather goes and actually interviews Anne Glover, who's the accused witch. Glover denies that she's a witch. Mather's not really having it because he seems to be a little bit like Cromwell himself, very anti-Catholic, and as a Puritan he thinks that Glover, being a Catholic, is a kind of idolater. And so it's just an easy shift in his mind from Catholicism to sort of demon worship. She has very little English, and this is relevant because they were trying to make her say the Lord's Prayer in English, and the fact that she couldn't recite it was some kind of sign that she had made a pact with the devil, when in fact she probably just didn't know enough English to recite it. And she had little dolls that she prayed with, and these were claimed to be satanic, but they were probably just little images and dolls of the Catholic saints. So we're looking at a tremendous, damaging cultural clash between Puritan Protestants and Catholics in this moment. And so she was found guilty and hanged in 1688. Then Mather publishes his account of it. The book becomes very popular, and within a couple of years, in Salem, some little kids are starting to show very similar kinds of bodily contortions and strange behaviors. They start behaving basically like the Goodwin kids did 3 years earlier, and very soon, the authorities are blaming witchcraft for the twitching children. Now, as I think many people know, there's a few different theories about how this happened. One that's most convincing, I think, might be ergot poisoning. Ergot is a kind of fungus that grows on rotting rye, and if the storage of the rye went bad in, say, Salem, and people were eating it in bread and so forth, then it's very possible that they could have been tripping balls, because ergot basically produces a kind of LSD hallucinatory experience. And so some people have suggested that that might be the case. It's interesting, actually, that there was a witch cake made by Tituba, who was a slave that was accused of witchcraft, one of the first people who was accused in Salem. She made what's called a witch cake, which is a combination of rye meal and the urine of the girls who were supposedly afflicted, and then you feed this to a dog, and somehow you augur this, and it's supposed to tell you who's doing the witchcraft. It didn't work, and then Tituba was actually blamed. Instead of practicing white magic, they said she was actually in league with the devil, and they arrested her and put her in a jail in Boston. She luckily survived it, I think in part by throwing many others under suspicion and sort of confusing the community, but she survived. What's interesting, though, is in addition to ergot poisoning, when I researched the sort of body contortions, I came to find that these kids might have had something like heavy metal poisoning. Lead poisoning does produce some of these behaviors, and it's possible that you could have had lead in cooking pots and serving plates and that kind of thing. The other main contender and seeming culprit is what's called psychogenic dystonia, or psychogenic hysteria. And this is basically a kind of psychosomatic distress that you basically have entirely through a kind of mental anguish, and then it starts to convert into bodily pain and contortion. So there's no physical causes that can be found, but it becomes a kind of collective hysteria. Dr. Robert Bartholomew says it tends to be more prevalent in teenage girls, and perhaps the most famous case is in 2012 in New York, in a town called Leroy. A group of high school girls started to suffer from these uncontrollable spasms and twitches. You can see videos of this online. First it started with the cheerleaders, and then kind of contagion spread. And these motor-based psychogenic events, they tend to happen in these kind of oppressive, restrictive environments. The same kind of environment you would find in Salem Puritanism, for example. And this is not to say that it's all in their head. This is a real form of suffering. It is real illness. It's just a very unique kind. And so I thought I just wanted to introduce this idea of a kind of collective hysteria and a kind of contagion of fear. And it's something that happens a lot in studying and understanding monsters and supposed sort of encounters with monsters. So we'll definitely come back to this in the future. All right, if you like this kind of stuff, then please hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you back here for more content. Take care.